Now we will be throwing Jayton's question to our last speaker. So we're just gonna pin Arts up right now. Hi, Arts. All right, Arts. So Art Seranno, once again, is the founder of 10 Design, whose field lies in architecture and revitalizing public spaces. So Arts, Jayton's question to you is, how might we work from hope as we work from home?
My gosh, that's a very heavy question. I would like to start off with commending Jayton and everyone else with all of the efforts that you guys are doing. Really very inspiring to be speaking alongside you guys. All of the work, siguro to answer the question, I think hope is really something that knows no place. Kahit na i-detach tayo sa kung saan tayo nilagay, as human beings, we should always live every day with hope at the core of our being. As designers lalo, na meron tayong chance to manipulate our environment, to design systems that could better how people live their lives. We don't always know the answer, pero we should always have hope. Kasi parang I think that's the most important thing. The answers will just definitely come our way. Basta hope is there. So, yun.
Right. Hey, thanks, Arts. Feel free to start whenever you want.
Oh, okay. Hello. I'm gonna start siguro by introducing myself. I'm Art Seranno. I'm an architect based in Escolta. I have an architecture studio called 1/0. 1/0. Siguro quick math lesson lang for everyone. I think DepEd should hear this kasi apparently hindi nila alam kung ano ibig sabihin ng 1 divided by 0. 1 divided by 0 is undefined. It's something in mathematics that's very parang in something that's so sure as math. You have solutions and then you have definite answers. There's something that it doesn't understand. Any number divided by 0 would come up as an error in our calculators, and I find that very fascinating as a designer kasi parang I kind of relate it to our identity and design solutions that we try to implement in all of our projects and how we affect change. Yun nga, as I mentioned kanina, we don't really know the answers most of the time, pero that constant drive to understand how things should work should kind of inform how we practice. So next slide. My architecture studio is based at the First United Building. So Escolta in downtown Manila used to be our premier business district. So before Ayala or Ortigas, in the 1900s, meron dyang mga two-story saloons in the Spanish era. It used to be our Ayala before we had Ayala. It housed most of the first skyscrapers, first elevators we had. The First United Building was built in 1926 by Andres Luna de San Pedro. The building beside it, right across, is Regina Building. It's also designed by Andres Luna de San Pedro. So most of them are almost 100 years old, and I think the mere idea of being in a place that lasting or that has that longevity really inspires us to create, to try to understand how they did it before. So the community we have now, we've seen it fluctuate over the years. So we started working in the building in 2015. Tapos we worked with graphic designers. There's a co-working space nearby. There's a coffee roaster at the 4th floor. Tapos there's also people in Heritage. There's the Hub, which is a community of artists at the ground floor, and the First United Building Corporation, who really is our main supporter in all of the efforts that we've been doing for the past almost decade. The Escolta Commercial Association is also very important because this comprises of all the building owners in the Escolta street. So next. During the lockdowns nung nag-start nung March, I think I can speak for everyone when we thought na parang okay, so they're gonna lock us down for 1 month. So I guess lahat tayo work from home muna, but so may konting air of naivety at the back of my head na parang siguro at that time I was kind of denying na okay, sige, mabilis lang naman siguro to. So siguro let's just try to make do with what we have. And then come April, we realized na this isn't gonna last a month. So we kind of took a break muna. We didn't go to Escolta kasi of course everything is shut down until June. So when we came back nung June, nakita namin na ang dami ng empty spaces. The occupancy of the building shot down from almost 100% to 70% now, which doesn't sound so bad. Pero for a building, for a heritage building that's already lacking in government support, that needs all that needs to get all of the support it can to maintain itself even, that's really a huge blow. So when the lockdown started, of course, I really felt off guard. Most of the projects we've been doing for the past 3 years, na stop sila almost 3/4 of everything just got stopped. Tapos at the back of my head, I was thinking, oh, we love doing the work that we're doing in Escolta, pero if we can't really survive ourselves, parang how can we provide for other people? So I realized na okay, nung April nag-stop muna kami mag-work just to kind of retreat and assess kung ano yung next steps natin, to kind of maybe think kung paano tayo magpro-progress while also maintaining ensuring that we survive as a studio. So next. During the lockdowns, we're very lucky to have been given the chance to work with people who are really inspiring or parang that are kind of aligned with how much of the philosophies we have as a studio. So one of the things na natapos namin before the lockdown was this. It's a project in Bataan which is called Luces Living. So konting background lang on the space. They're a mixed use eco-conscious retreat wellness center. So it's a 2-story project in Bataan. Tapos we kind of wanted to play around with light as a material kasi the client's middle name is Luces. So Luces in Spanish means light. And they wanted to translate a structure, how we can kind of communicate light in terms of architectural language. So what we did is we played around with this basic geometry. Yung equilateral triangles na yan, we started with that small block. Tapos we multiplied it 3,200 times to create this canopy. And then we punched holes sa ceiling to kind of connect the inside to the outside. So it's kind of like our ode to the sun, or parang yung Surya Namaskar in yoga practice. So they opened in March, and during the lockdowns, they've been constantly trying to let people educate more people about efforts in Bataan, local enterprises that they can promote. So they've been trying to survive also during the pandemic. Tapos another thing that we worked on before the lockdown, a long time before na. Next is bakery in Makati. This one naman, working with Panaderia Toyo really is very inspiring kasi knowing their process and their understanding of the importance of the ingredients that they use in the bread that they make, we kind of wanted to parang try to understand how we can apply that in architecture and interior design. So dito, yung exercise namin as a studio is how we can try to, I guess, do away with our preconceived notions of what materials is and what they should be. So parang yung exercise namin dito was we looked at dos por dos. Dos por dos is something that you normally use in construction para mag-build ng formworks, para takpan yung, usually nasa loob siya ng cabinets. It's something that's usually just disposed after construction. And we thought of we kind of wanted to question bakit ganun. Parang can we use this material in a contemporary setting or parang manipulate it in a very modern way? So we tried to highlight where the bread is made, where the bread is displayed, where people would sit. Tapos we created the grid. Tapos it kind of iterates downward kung saan ka pwedeng manood ng baker making the bread, or kung saan ka pwedeng umupo to talk with your friends. So it kind of reacts to the users that will be housed in the space. So something so simple as tangile, dos por dos, I think yun yung important for us as a design practice, to kind of break that notion na parang expensive materials lang yung pwedeng gamitin for good design. No, I think it's really how you manipulate the simplest of materials. So next, of course, we're very inspired with the First United building and how it's supporting local enterprises. During the lockdowns, of the offices also at the fifth floor closed down. We also have some friends who've left their spaces, pero they're continuing their practice because it doesn't make sense na having all of these restrictions to have a physical space at this moment is really difficult. So the support that First United Building is giving to the hub is really very admirable. So it's actually the first project that we've worked on in Escolta. So it's basically a creative space for startup entrepreneurs. So our role as architects is really just to organize kung anong sizes ng spaces nila. And parang as the designers, we tried to step back kasi we're designing for artists and designers, and we didn't want to impose our architecture to them. We wanted them to be part of the process. So instead of designing physical spaces, we designed systems that they can use to kind of promote this visibility, this connectivity, this inclusiveness in a community. So what we did was we proposed for them to use wood slats, to use glass partitions, or to use parang wire mesh, anything that can really promote this idea of being connected to other people. And so for the past 3 years, 4 years, it's really interesting to see different iterations of the same design. So very interesting na naging part sila ng process na yun. So next. One of the things that has really bothered us for the past 5 years in Escolta is all of the buildings here are, most of the buildings here are considered architectural gems. And for the past 5 years, we've seen close to 8, 9 different buildings torn down. During the lockdowns lalo, I think this problem has been sort of accelerated kasi nawala yung check and balance in all of these restrictions in demolishing. So parang na-accelerate yung process of destroying our built heritage. And we talk about public health, we talk about public transport, housing, but rarely do we talk about protection of our heritage. And I think it's very important. Looking at that problem, I was trying to understand ano ba yung root cause of this dilemma in our city building. And I think you can really trace it to this culture of consumption and designed obsolescence. Next. Our cities are built are informed by this insatiable energy to consume. From how much food kung anong restaurant yung pupuntahan mo, kung gaano kalaki yung restaurant na yun, how many malls are built in our cities, how our cities are cut up into smaller chunks, kung gaano ka-dense yung city na yun natin, all of these are informed by consumption. So as designers, parang we're thinking how can we change the approach of designing things for obsolescence? Parang important na tanungin natin kung para saan ba yung mga binibuild natin na structures or developments. So in downtown Manila pa lang, you already see a string of demolitions happening. Sadly, yung culture na to of designing for obsolescence has already trickled down to how we build our spaces. Leases in malls are normally 2 to 3 years minimum. Buildings, condominiums usually have 50 years of ownership. These buildings in downtown Manila are just 4 examples of buildings that have been demolished over the past 5 years. You have the Uy Subin building, which housed the new Poheng Lumpia. It's an Art Deco building in near Binondo Church. Tapos you have the American Chamber of Commerce, which is behind the First United building. You have the Paco Market, which is currently being demolished to be renovated and modernized. So yun, it's very important to try to rally behind uh, preserving what we have left. So we kind of, as a studio last year, we worked on this proposal. We call imprints. Parang we thought na, okay, we're already based in Escolta and we've seen a lot of proposals before that kind of talk about preserving our heritage, parang designing boutique hotels in downtown Manila that would invite investors to come back to Manila. Pero we thought na that shouldn't be the case. Eh. Parang placemaking and heritage preservation isn't really about a big parang paintbrush, just changing, purging everything that's already there. You have to understand yung context of what's already there and how you can build from that context. So looking at the history, you have 1900s, it was a sleepy street. It then grew to a commercial district, the center of commerce outside of Intramuros. Tapos after the war, nagkaroon tayo ng konting downward trajectory sa Escolta with the growth of Ayala and Ortigas and other glossier CBDs. Tapos over the past few years, nagkaroon ng resurgence with artist interventions and creative placemaking. So next. We wanted to grow from that history and try to understand how we can take bits from that history, take bits from what's already in our streets, and then how we can maybe formalize everything and then develop like an ecosystem of developments that would coexist and regenerate together instead of be competitors. So yung objectives namin in building in this and proposing this is one, to revitalize heritage buildings, of course. There are tons of heritage buildings in Escolta palang that aren't really utilized, and a lot of them naman, like our building, is occupied by offices. So you just need to kind of inject new energy to it. Second is to generate communal growth. So we need to understand that heritage preservation isn't just saving the facade or saving the physical manifestation of the architecture. Parang it's also about manipulating the software or parang understanding elements inside the building that can maybe help other parts in that district to grow. So we need to generate that communal growth and try to think paano ba mag-grow yung Escolta as a district in the future. So third is to increase local microeconomy. So to try to understand na parang microeconomy in the area is very important kasi our idea of soft cities, lalo na ngayon in the lockdowns, parang we rarely go to Makati. I live in Manila and I really just go in a certain radius around my place of residence. So I think yun yung very important to highlight now is dapat may focus tayo in developing that microeconomy further. And then fourth, as a kind of parang offshoot of the first three, we can then pedestrianize Escolta by integrating all of the elements that are already here, improving the streetscape that's already here, tapos designing that streetscape to maybe accommodate growth for everyone. So next. So yun, just looking at the context, you see financial institutions, you see offices, you see restaurants around the First United building. You have a vibrant art scene at the ground floor. Tapos you also have a vibrant streetscape, and of course you also have the informal economy in the streets, yung mga street vendors natin. Next, our idea really is to the main core of it is yun nga, to update the software. So you see these colors, yung orange relates to restaurants and commercial establishments that would be food. So if you noticed, all of the buildings would have orange zones at the ground floor just to promote this lively streetscape. Tapos you have the blue zones, which are offices. Most of the buildings here, like First United Building, Regina Building, Burke Building, all of them have tenants. So you have to just nurture what's already there and introduce places where they can eat, places where they can sleep or reside. So those are elements that we can inject further. So next. This is one conceptual view that we prepared for a building right across the First United Building. The Santa Cruz building burned down actually last year, and the interior of it is already torn down. It's slated for a condominium development, and its location right smack when you enter Escolta is really very pivotal kasi yun yung una mong makikita eh. And in our proposal, we wanted this to kind of remain as a low density structure, something like a visitor center where people can maybe look at history of the district and maybe understand kung ano yung nandito. Tapos next. This is a view of Roman Santos at the ground floor. So most of the ground floor spaces we wanted to propose is really for restaurants, for commercial establishments that are already here. We even went so far as parang trying to study how we can integrate yung mga vendors sa street and maybe create a program for them in the ground floor spaces of certain buildings that can maybe help educate them or parang try to integrate them in the growth of the community so that they won't be displaced. So next. All of those cases are actually storefront activation. So last Escolta Block Festival, we had this idea for a storefront incubator across Escolta in Panpisco building. This is actually an event, one of the events there. I think this is actually and a half speaking. This is from the Tipong Filipino exhibit. So yung storefront incubator idea namin is one hurdle that we see or we encounter when we talk to other building owners is they don't really understand what we're doing. Kung bakit natin gusto na active yung storefront natin, bakit ayaw natin na bangko yan or mini stop yan or JRS Express yan. They needed an example to kind of visualize kung ano yung potential of having that kind of typology at the ground floor. So this is like a case study of that. And so far, last year, magandang reception for it and they wanted to keep it. And thankfully, during the pandemic, they kept the space, so it's still intact. We're just waiting for things to kind of relax a little bit so maybe we can activate it again. So next. I think coming from those proposals, we see how our cities are being partitioned off and being sold off to the highest bidder. All of our heritage buildings are a victim to this kasi developers see heritage buildings as prime sites for condominium developments, and that's something that we should be critical about because not only our streets, everything in our cities should be for our people. The progress that we dream of should be for everyone and not only for the privileged who can afford it. If we don't start asking these questions 20, 30, 40 years from now, our cities would be built not for Filipinos. They would be built for foreigners who want to stay here. So I think it's very important for us to start asking these questions and be more critical about how they build our cities. The community, yung response ng community so far has been really good. One thing that we really liked about last year's festival is when we started calling for volunteers. Parang we asked this question of what Escolta is or ano yung what does Escolta represent for them, and nagulat kami sa ibang answers nila na some of them answered it's their home, they feel safe, it's a place where they just go to when they want to be inspired. So Escolta really represents a lot of our identity, and it's very important to nurture that community so that we can regenerate and grow as a community, protecting our built heritage. So yun, I think Escolta Block has amplified yung awareness natin of our rich collective identity. It has made us more aware that we have a very rich local pool of creatives, of talents, of musicians, of graphic designers, artists. We have a very rich history in our built heritage. And I think it's very important to kind of take care of this kasi slowly, lalo na over the past 5 months, we've seen 4 different buildings being torn down, not just in Escolta. And the Escolta block really represents something bigger than Escolta itself. It represents something, it represents our identity, and we should try to protect that in the best way that we could. We hope na in the future, when we start designing for buildings, if we try to ask uh, these questions and be more mindful about what we already have. Kasi during the lockdowns, nakita natin how everything has been shut down. And I think designers now should look more inward and try to understand. Now, we already have a lot of rich narrative here. We already have a lot of materials that we can manipulate and play around with. We don't need so much imports, or we don't need to look elsewhere for inspiration. We just have to be more mindful about what we already have and try to generate and iterate ideas from that so that we can maybe try to define that local identity. So yun, I guess looking at the past 5 years, the growth of Escolta has been really good. And I think one question that we should ask is, if developers would start building our cities the way they wanted, would we have the same image as the one on the left? Parang the image on the left is a modern city. It has a high-speed monorail. It has architecture in a state of the art. Pedestrians are designed, are provided with better street designs. Buildings are interconnected. This is a visualization of what Escolta would look like if we erase all of the heritage that's there. And it's already happening. And I think now's the time to ask na this development might be good, pero is that what we need? I think yun yung question na kailangan nating tanungin sa mga developers natin. Who are we really building these modern sentinels for? Why are we reclaiming land in Manila Bay and partitioning it off for private investors? We need to ask those questions para ma-save natin yung heritage natin. I think the gap really is more in educating people of what we already have. And the creative sector is really very important in amplifying this message that all of our heritage is already rich and we need to develop ideas from there. I guess to leave off with this question, the question that I wanted to ask everyone is how might we co-create with our communities for the development of spaces that are empathic and contextualized and not consumptive. We need to try to ask, bakit ganun yung pagkakabuild sa cities natin ngayon? Why are when you look at our streets, you see a lot of homeless people. Bakit wala silang mauwian? When you go to EDSA, you see a lot of people trapped in traffic. Bakit wala silang masakyan? So all of those can be traced to how our cities are being portioned off to be consumed. And why does it have to be portioned off in such a way that only those who can afford to consume it can? I think yun yung question that we should try to answer in the next few years. So,
Okay. Yay. Thank you, Arts. Okay. All right. I guess as one of the takeaways, Arts, I think you were the one who shared it on Twitter of like a week ago, the article about how we need to start designing our cities around neighborhoods, not the peak
yeah.
commuter. And I really feel and this is a recurring theme for all of our speakers about how we need to begin with our communities, and that's what Escolta really is. So it's really about revitalizing the growth of our think neighborhood, think district, instead of thinking about the person who commutes like from, at least in my own experience, from Quezon City to Makati or to wherever. Now, because I'm always just in Quezon City. And I think another key takeaway that I have was about um, when all the demolitions that happened in the past few months, 5 years, I guess it is rooted in that culture of consumption and designed obsolescence,
Mm.
which we've seen. I guess it's practically systemic and interesting because I was in conversation with somebody recently about how they were thinking that the Quezon Institute in Quezon City, which is the basically known as the tuberculosis center,
Yeah.
would probably be the best place to repurpose as like a an isolation center or at least something like that. And parang the person who I was talking to was saying that a lot of the solutions that we can find are already standing. We just parang we deign them as useless because we don't try to reintegrate them in the community. So
Yes.
thank you, Arts. And now to come full circle, we are going to throw the question of arts to Tetel this time. So just so that we have like a full, everybody here gets to talk to each other. Tetel, Arts' question is, how might we co-create with our communities for the development of spaces that are empathic, contextualized, and not consumptive?
I super love that whole discussion by Arts. To be honest, it was this culture of consumption that really made the decision for me to go to the rural areas that much easier. I wanted to get away from this to a certain extent, and I was longing for community. I think in terms of designing spaces, what I'd really like to see is that becomes the starting point for anyone who's deciding to get into a space and develop it.
Mm.
Local consultation, immersion into the community, so that you know what their needs are and you address that. It's not even just spaces; it's even in my experience in programs. Um, Before you get deployed to doctors to the barrios, you sit down with other doctors to the barrios, and one of the key messages they tell you even before you get deployed is, hey, when you go there, I know you have all these ideas about what you want to do, what your projects are. Like, I know you have this idea, this is how we'll stop tuberculosis, this is how we'll reduce home births. But really, don't do anything first. Sit down, listen. Sit down and listen. Try to figure out what are their problems, where are they coming from. And that is something that I'd like to see incorporated into the design process, especially of spaces. The question, for who is this for, that should be in every plan. And really, when you have primary goals for your projects, I think we should really push that community building and responding to local needs is one of your primary goals. So I think that's important. I guess I'll come from a rural perspective. We see different areas, especially tourist areas, getting into accelerated development. And then when you get there, you try to see, is this development trickling into the community? Oftentimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
So really, how do we argue that we're developing? Like, who are we helping? So those are the things that I'd really like to see. If we're going to go into new spaces, make sure you don't leave the people who have rights to that area behind. So I think that's very important. I really loved your sharing, Arts. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Hello.
Okay. And I think that officially concludes the speaker portion of our event. And we're going to quickly wrap up this section. Thank you, Arts. Thank you, Tetel.